예, 그러면
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, we'll now begin. Hello, everyone. I am Academic Director Kim Tae-ho, and now we'd like to begin the International Conference on Constitutionalized Environmental Right and Paradigm Shift. In order to officially kick off today's conference, I'd like to give you opening remark. And not me, sorry, we'd like to invite Kang Hyun-ho, the chairman of Korean Academy of Environmental Science. It's a great honor to hold an international conference in commemoration of the 40th anniversary of the establishment of the environmental right. Regarding the environmental right, under the Korean Constitution, Article 33 of the Constitution, which was completely revised in 1980, stipulate that all citizens shall have the right to a healthy and pleasant environment. The state and all citizens shall endeavor to protect the environment, and also we have the environmental right provisions. However, with regard to the environmental right as a fundamental right, various views have been advocated in terms of the right, contents, and effectiveness. At first, there was a tendency to see this in a somewhat decorative meaning, but as the national and social structure changed repeatedly and the value of the environment increased more and more, the environmental right has now established itself as the fundamental right with a significant implication. The tendency to focus on environmental right is accelerating further in conjunction with the aim of becoming an environmental state at the level of national development. Under the theme of constitutional environmental rights for nature and future generation, Professor Mary Wood of the Graduate School of Oregon, Professor Christian Kallis of Free University of Berlin, lawyer Rhoda Bearhayden of International Network for Climate Justice will make a presentation, while Professor Park Si-won, Professor Chun Hoon, lawyer Han Hyun-jun, and also director will be joining as discussant. I hope that today's international conference, the structured discourse will be presented to better improve the value of the environment in a larger frame, including the revisions of the constitutions and implications that should be reflected in individual legislations that embodies the right to the environment can be found. I'd like to express my sincere gratitude to the Ministry of Environment, KEI, Korea Environment Institute, Korea Environmental Law Association for providing support to host the conference. My special gratitude goes to Academic Director Kim Tae-ho, who worked hard to make the international conference a success. 2020, October 27. Thank you very much.
네, 회장님 감사합니다.
Thank you very much, Chairman Kang Hyun-ho, for your opening remark. We'll immediately officially kick off the international conference. Let me introduce myself. I'm Academic Director Kim Tae-ho, and also I teach Administrative Law and Environmental Law at the university. In commemoration of the 40th anniversary of the inclusions of the Environmental Right Clause in the Constitutions of the Republic of Korea, we are hosting an international conference to discuss the task of paradigm shift, which puts the environment at the center of the social agenda. Although we have invited world-class scholars and experts, it is regrettable truly that we were unable to listen their presentation in person due to COVID-19. Instead, we are having a webinar. I am confident that later part, probably we can invite them again and see them in person. International conference usually have a bigger goal, which is mostly providing a chance to exchange views. But since the circumstances of each country are different, there are often limitations in discussing in detail. However, today we'll be able to hear a lot of views because environmental issues are not only one country's problem but a common problem faced by humanity. So it is a problem that everybody can discuss their views. We have invited 3 scholars and lawyer, actually 2 scholars and 1 lawyer, and we do have intention and purpose of inviting speakers. First speaker is Professor Mary Wood from University of Oregon. Are you ready, Professor Mary Wood? Are you ready? I'm very pleased to see you, Professor Mary Wood. So, some of you who are joining us virtually through Zoom, you can select the language that you wish to hear. So if you choose channel 1, you'll be able to get the simultaneous interpretation. Channel 2, you'll be getting English interpretation. So please look at the screen, and there's a bar, and you are allowed to choose the language that you prefer to listen. So whatever language you want, you can hear. Professor Mary Wood currently teaches at the University of Oregon and environment, and also she works as the center head of the environment and resources, and mostly she advocates environment and today about the nature, especially she wrote a lot of books regarding the trust, public trust doctrine regarding environment. If you get access to the YouTube, there are a lot of outstanding, great presentation given by Professor Mary Wood. If you're interested, please get access. So I'll be giving you 30 minutes. Professor Mary Wood, would you like to start?
Professor Merriweather, would you like to start your presentation now? Can you hear the interpreters?
Yes, please. Okay. All right. Thank you. It is a real honor to be here at this conference to present, and I dedicate this presentation to the youth worldwide, including the 30 brave youth in South Korea who are suing their governments to force carbon pollution reduction before it is too late. Their future survival is in jeopardy due to the failures of governments worldwide. And I wish to honor the governmental officials, judges, and lawyers present in this conference and around the world who must rise to this extraordinary moment in time to safeguard our planet and restore our climate system before it is too late. Today, I would like to talk about our climate reality and then the decarbonization imperative. And I will talk about the rule of law, the children's climate cases, and the court's role in climate crisis. Let us first talk about the reality we face. We have to talk about climate because otherwise the law will be irrelevant if we don't match the law with the reality. So I will talk a bit about our climate situation, our emergency. The leading scientists of the world say that we have to get our carbon dioxide, atmospheric carbon, back down to 350 parts per million. That is the highest safe level. We are beyond 410 parts per million now. The highest temperature increase is 1.5 Celsius, and we are almost there now. Our fossil fuel emissions worldwide are driving catastrophe. I'm going to give you a few quotes, statements from this case I will talk about later. It's the leading climate case in the United States and one of the biggest in the world. And these are statements a court has said about our climate crisis. And then I'll talk about the case later. The Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals has said that our carbon dioxide levels have skyrocketed to levels not seen for almost 3 million years. This will wreak havoc on the earth if it remains unchecked. And I wish to point out that the temperature rise projected from our pollution is 11 degrees Fahrenheit increase by the end of the century. That is not habitable. It is not survivable by humans. And so a child born today is looking at a planet where they cannot survive at the end of their lifespan. and maybe much, much sooner. You know, this is hard to believe. Many people can't believe it. And so I give you this quote from a leading science writer, Elizabeth Colbert, who says, "It may seem impossible to believe that a technologically advanced society could choose, in essence, to destroy itself, but that is what we are now in the process of doing." Now, we are subject to nature's laws more than our own laws. Nature's laws are supreme. They govern what will happen to us. And one of the most terrifying of nature's laws has to do with dangerous feedback loops. And unless the law understands this, it won't be relevant. So let me explain it very quickly. A dangerous feedback loop means if we push the system too far, we heat it too much, then nature will kick in its own processes and will heat the world into runaway heating that we cannot call back. It is not survivable. It is an inhabitable planet. And these tipping points, as they are called, have already started. We're not beyond the point of no return yet, but we're near there. One of the tipping points is at the northern latitudes where there is vast permafrost, and that contains carbon dioxide and methane, huge quantities. If that starts melting, those quantities go up into the atmosphere. And you can see from this picture, it already has started melting. So if we put more fossil fuel emissions into the atmosphere, it heats our Earth, that melts the permafrost, and it all goes in the atmosphere. We cannot go past that tipping point, or nobody will survive. Scientists are worried we are on the verge of a permafrost collapse. These are the things courts must deal with. The UN chief said in 2019, "We are at the point of no return. It is in sight and hurtling towards us." This is very well known to the courts in America. The Juliana case, the court said, "We are approaching the point of no return. If we don't do something, it will bury cities, spawn life-threatening disasters, and jeopardize critical food and water supplies." So I want to talk about the decarbonization imperative because we still have a chance to pull back. The UN chief said we must act by 2020. He said that in 2018 to prevent runaway change. We had to start bending the rising curve of carbon emissions, push it down by 2020. In 2019, there was no hope of that, nothing. All the world's governments were continuing to pollute so much. But COVID hit and caused a decrease of 8%. We have to continue that decrease to 45% within 10 years. Then we have to get to full decarbonization of our energy system by 2050. That is a huge task. South Korea has set a climate objective of only 25% by 2030. So South Korea has a 20% deficit in its goal. Now, the United States is by far the country responsible for this worldwide emergency and catastrophe because we have had decades of promoting fossil fuels because of our industry. And President Trump came in with a promise to develop $50 trillion of fossil fuels. The US is the largest exporter of these fuels around the world. When I tell people what situation we're in, I take this quote, it's from the science advisor to President Obama many years ago. He said, "The current situation of the world in relation to the climate problem is that we're in a car with bad brakes, driving towards a cliff in the fog." Well, we are all in the back seat of that car. You are in South Korea. Your children are, your grandchildren, my children. All of us, all in the world, are in the back seat of that car. And we are trapped. And that car is going towards the cliff. President Trump knows that cliff is in sight, and he is pushing his foot down on the accelerator. and we are all trapped in the back. And so the question is, will courts around the world stop before the car goes over the cliff with all of us in it? Will the courts stop the car? The founders of my country never anticipated such unfathomable power in one US president. The climate emergency makes this an ecological tyranny for the whole world. The Ninth Circuit judge, one of them said, in the opinion, the government bluntly insists that it has the absolute and unreviewable power to destroy the nation. Now let's look at South Korea's energy system. It relies almost entirely on imported fossil fuels. It is the second largest importer of liquefied natural gas and the top importer of US oil. And that is growing. The world must transform to renewable energy very quickly, and that would include South Korea. There are deep decarbonization pathways that engineers and policymakers have identified, but it takes political will to execute them. In the United States, it is clear that the fossil fuels now going out to the world must stay in the ground. And there's a huge movement to keep fossil fuels safe in the ground. But that means we would cut off exports. Now, my region has been identified as a gateway to Asia for all these massive exports. I am right there in Oregon, on the coast, the Pacific coast. And in the course of 4 years, there were 16 projects proposed to export to Asian markets, including South Korea. And so we were identified as a gateway, but the people of this region are very opposed to that because it would ruin our fish and wildlife and ruin our communities and be dangerous. And so there's tremendous opposition to that. And so far, none of the projects have been approved. And so in this region, the people are rising up saying, we're not a gateway, we're a chokehold to this industry's fossil fuel scheme, and that none shall pass. And so what I want to leave you with here is the idea that South Korea, along with all countries, have a climate imperative, but there's also a need to provide for alternative energy because supplies will be cut, will be diminished. Now let's go to talk about the rule of law. And the rule of law was very much a statutory paradigm until recently. And so I will talk about how statutory law brought this crisis in the United States, and then talk about a new paradigm of constitutional rights. Statutory law came about in the United States in the 1970s, and many, many laws gave vast powers to agencies to protect the environment. But unfortunately, the agencies were captured by the fossil fuel industry, by Exxon, by the big corporations. They lobbied the agencies, they made political campaign contributions to the president, and pretty soon the agencies began working for the industry and not for the people. And they started using the laws as tools of legalized destruction. And they would allow permits to pollute. So all of the fossil fuel, dirty, dirty fuel, was allowed for decades to pollute the atmosphere and pollute the rivers and fisheries and soils. And the statutes that were supposed to protect the environment became the opposite. I've written about that in my book, Nature's Trust. A constitutional paradigm is much different. That is recognizing that we only have 3 branches of government I believe in South Korea as well. We have the legislature, the executive, and the courts. And it is the distinct function of courts to uphold the fundamental rights of the citizens, the constitutional rights. Now, there are cases around the world bringing constitutional claims to protect the environment, and they are fashioned under different types of claims: the right to life, the right to environment, the right to dignity and due process, and Indian treaty rights and native rights and rights of nature. South Korea has its own environmental constitutional right. And what I want to say about this is that certainly all of these rights have been violated by governments worldwide. That is not the issue. And I hope courts don't spend too much time and waste too much precious time on that, because the real issue is what is the court's role in remedying these rights. We're looking at a planet which will no longer support us. And so, of course, these rights have been violated by most countries. I want to, rather than talk about each one individually, talk briefly about a principle that underlies legal systems around the world called the public trust principle, because it really illustrates the expectations of the people in a constitutional democracy. The public trust is ancient law. It goes back to ancient Rome. It has had an influence in the legal systems of every civilized continent, including Asia and South America and Europe and North America. And its premise is very simple. It says that government has to protect ecology, the survival resources for the benefit of the people. The government is the trustee, and the present and future citizens own these resources, not Exxon. Exxon doesn't own the resources. The people own the resources. And government has to answer to the people to protect them for their survival. This principle has been around since the beginning of human civilization. And law scholars say it's like a slate upon which all those other constitutions are written. It underlies them and infuses them with logic. It predates every constitution. And so in America, one Supreme Court said, all citizens have certain inherent and indefeasible rights, meaning that the citizens give government the power, not the reverse. The citizens give government power. And when citizens give government power, they hold back certain rights. They never give power to the government to eliminate the resources that are crucial to their survival and well-being. The people hold that back. But this right is only good if it is enforced. And that means the courts have to be involved, because we only have 3 branches of government, only 3. And the court's role is to enforce these fundamental rights against the political branches. So now I'm coming to the 4th section of my talk, which is talking about the children's climate cases. And these climate cases are known as atmospheric trust litigation around the world because they're very similar to one another. There are cases in all of these countries and more to be brought. And one case is in South Korea. And I'll talk about a case in the United States as well. The United States case was really the first and maybe the biggest of these cases. And it was Juliana versus United States. It was brought on behalf of 21 youth in 2015 against many federal agencies, because it doesn't work to sue just one federal agency. They're all creating this fossil fuel system. It was brought in the Federal District Court of Oregon, right here where I live. And it was the first case ever in the United States to challenge the government and assert constitutional environmental rights. And the rights they asserted were both from the Constitution's express due process clause. We don't have a right to environment clause like South Korea. We don't have that. So they brought it under the due process clause, but also the public trust principle that I just told you about. Now, this is called the biggest case on the planet. Excuse me? Oh, this is called the biggest case on the planet because it challenged the fossil fuel policy of the entire United States. And the United States fossil fuel policy is now driving the world into catastrophe. And so the children sought two forms of remedy. First, they sought a declaration from the court that they had rights to a stable climate system that would support their survival. And two, they wanted the court to order the government to make a plan to phase out fossil fuel emissions. And this must be science-based, not political-based. The science says we cannot go beyond 1.5 Celsius heating. And so here's a scientific paper I just put up, and that is the centerpiece of the litigation. The science really forms the fiduciary obligation that I told you about in the public trust. It forms the heart of it because it tells the courts how much decarbonization has to be achieved and how fast. In South Korea, 30 youth are suing the government for failure to act on climate change in the same way, and they are seeking a declaratory judgment, very much like the Juliana plaintiffs. On November 10th, 2016, just a couple of days after President Donald Trump was elected, the federal district court judge gave a ruling handing a huge victory to the youth. Judge Ann Aiken said, "I have no doubt that the right to a climate system capable of sustaining human life is fundamental to a free and ordered society." Now, normally there would be a trial. The government would be on trial, and normally the court would develop a remedy using fact-finding and really develop it, and then it would go on appeal. But the Trump administration lawyers did everything they could to force a premature appeal, and they succeeded. So they got a premature appeal to the appellate court, the Ninth Circuit, before a trial. So it sent a hypothetical case up to the Ninth Circuit, an abstract case with no remedy. The Ninth Circuit did not really focus on the rule of law because I think everybody knows the United States has clearly violated the constitutional rights of these youth and all youth. So the focus was on providing the remedy. The majority opinion was written by two judges. There are three on a panel, and two form the majority. And the opinion came out January 17th of this year. And Judge Hurwitz, pictured above, began the opinion saying, basically the nation, and that is the world too, is on the eve of destruction. That is incredible for a court to say, to begin an opinion. I've never read an opinion like this. He said, the government's knowing failure to change its policies may hasten environmental apocalypse. He said that the children probably have viable constitutional claims. Again, that's not the issue. It shouldn't be. It shouldn't be at this point. But these two judges said they have no power to grant relief. They won't grant any relief. Any relief. And so Professor Douglas Kaiser of Yale Law School has written about courts and the ones that fail to give any relief in climate. He says this. He says, denying their own expansive power, these courts cowered before catastrophe. And I guess I would say it even another way. I think in my mind, the courts that do not step up to climate crisis, do not honor their position in government. The founders relied on a court to enforce the fundamental rights of youth and everybody. And where those rights are violated, the court must enforce and stop the political branches. And I think that these judges did not honor their moment in history and their position in the governmental structure, because they said there would be nothing they could do, even though we're at the edge of apocalypse. The third judge, and there were only 3 on the panel, the third judge was Judge Josephine Staten. And she wrote a very strong dissent. She said the majority, the other 2 judges, appear ready to yield even if the political branches walk the nation over a cliff. This deference to the other branches ignores our constitutional mandate. Courts serve as the ultimate backstop to enforce the fundamental rights of the citizens. Courts have the duty to enforce these rights. The Constitution does not condone the nation's willful destruction. And when they say the nation's willful destruction, you can probably just substitute the world's willful destruction, because of course, when President Donald Trump pushes fossil fuels so strong and doesn't change course, when we're in that car, he's not only pushing the nation over the edge, he's pushing every nation on earth over the cliff. The youth have asked the court for full review of their case, and we're waiting to see if the court grants a petition. But Judge Staten poses a question for all of these judges looking at all of those climate cases. She says, history will not judge us kindly. When the seas envelop our coastal cities, fires and droughts haunt our interiors, and storms ravage everything between, those remaining will ask, why did so many do so little? Other nations' courts are providing remedies. They are stepping up. In Pakistan, the Supreme Court issued a very strong decision that created a climate commission. So the court actually created a commission and appointed the chairman of the commission to actually carry out the constitutional climate obligations of that country. Very successful remedy. In Colombia, the court found too that deforestation of the Amazon was violating the constitutional rights of the youth and causing climate change, and ordered a deforestation plan within 5 months. In the Netherlands, the Supreme Court of the Netherlands ordered that government to reduce carbon emissions by 25% within 1 year of the decision, and that was by the end of this year. And it rejected the argument that the majority of Juliana accepted. The majority of Juliana said, this is for the political branches. The other courts are saying, no, it's for the courts to enforce the fundamental rights. And so the last part of my talk is on the court's role. And it is the youth's hope that these cases from elsewhere, from Pakistan and Colombia and the Netherlands, that this will start the green judicial dominoes and will persuade the US courts as well. There are many state cases pending in this nation. If there were a decision by South Korean courts or by a court in Mexico, anywhere, on the climate, it will push those green judicial dominoes towards this new paradigm, which probably must happen to restrain the political branches from continuing to destroy the climate system. And so last, the institutional litigation remedy is important. Why are courts important? What do they provide? They provide a statement of what is needed to come into compliance. They can provide a statement of decarbonization. They can provide backstop injunctions, which means in the United States, they can actually stop fossil fuel extraction from public lands. They can stop exports out of the country. But mainly, they also can back the car, can force the political branches to back the car away from the cliff by issuing what are called structural injunctions. And this is where They create a plan. They tell the political branches to create a plan to remedy the situation. So the court doesn't create the plan at all. That's not the court's job. The court forces the other branches to do their jobs and supervises it and sets time frames for compliance. They might use special masters or appoint commissioners. And so what the judicial branch brings in this emergency is a focus on the emergency. They bring a forum that puts sidewalls on what the government can do. They have the power of injunctions. They create a space for the agencies to operate without the constant political pressure from the fossil fuel industry, which has brought this whole world to the point of collapse. And they create a problem-solving mechanism with clear timeframes. And so I'll leave you with the idea that our planet is on the court's docket. Whether we're in South Korea or Mexico or Canada or France or the United States of America, there are courts holding these cases all around the world for these youth. And these youth, I remind us all, are looking at their lifespan, and they will not have a world that they can survive in, much less thrive in, unless we back that car away from that cliff. And that will probably take the courts, because the political branches have not been inclined for decades, at least in the United States. The leading scientists of the world in the climate area wrote an amicus brief supporting the youth children in the earlier case that they had. And this is what the leading scientists said, and I'll leave you with this. Judicial relief may be the best, the last, and at this late stage, the only real chance to preserve a habitable planet for young people and future generations. If you would like extra resources, there is a movie about the Juliana versus United States case. And there's also, and that's coming out November 11th, I believe. There's also a book on global environmental constitutionalism by my colleagues, James May and Aaron Daly. Thank you very much.
네,
Thank you, Professor Mary Wood, for your passionate presentation. So we've definitely earned a lot of insight from your presentation. So let me briefly summarize her comments.
소개되지.
Well, she talked about due process and also the public trust doctrine, and utilizing the due process and public trust doctrines, because both of these has a constitutional law basis. Definitely we can protect environmental rights. In that sense, the court's role is critical. Courts should come up with the remedies and also make a declaratory relief. I believe that the topic that she discussed is a common interest. Once again, the role of the court should be stronger or not. Of course, that depends on the country and country's decisions. But in terms of expanding environmental right under the constitutions, I think our presentation was very helpful. Especially Professor Marriott, I'd like to express my special gratitude, because the state of Oregon, there was a big wildfire. So I know that it was quite difficult for you to write the presentation, but thank you so much for giving us such an outstanding presentation. I'd like to express my deep gratitude. And also, having this international conference, the time in Oregon is almost midnight. And Professor Marriott, well, if you can stay with us until the end, it will be very much appreciated. But it's really late. So Instead of asking you to stay, we have Professor Park Shi-won from Gangwon University. So why don't we listen to his discussions, and then we will take a break. So, Professor Shi-won Park, would you like to make a comment?
Siwon Park. And can you hear us in English? On your Zoom tool, you can probably see the globe mark, and if you click it, you can choose English. And then we have the simultaneous interpreter for you. So any comments in Korean will be provided in English for you. And
Yes, I did it.
이 환경법 40주년 기념한
In commemorating the 40th anniversary of the environmental right, I have prepared my discussion in English, so I'll be speaking in English.
Professor Mary, thank you so much for your presentation, and I'm very honored to be your designated discussant today. And thank you so much for your participation in this very late night, and despite all the wildfire crisis in the state of Oregon. So we really thank you. And we are, this is a really significant moment because we are celebrating the 40th anniversary of Korean Constitution incorporating the environmental rights. And also, in addition to COVID-19 pandemic, we are experiencing various environmental crises. And I think it's very timely that we discuss environmental rights, constitutional environmental rights at this very critical juncture. And Professor Wood, since you've been known for a long time theorist, scholar, writer, and also a big supporter and motivator of a recent youth litigation on climate change, I'd like to ask your opinion on this particular litigation. And I understood in your presentation you emphasized that the violation of constitutional right is very obvious, and we have to focus on the role of courts, especially what are the remedies available. But since in Korea we are also, in Korea there is a pending case in the Constitutional Court, and the Korean Youth Group is asking for the court to find the violation of a constitutional right. So my comments will focus on the violation of constitutional rights. I think personally it is very impressive to find a number of US judges who are willing to find the fundamental rights in climate system. But nonetheless, it is also a disappointing result that the Ninth Circuit ruled against the youth in earlier this year. And I'm wondering what you think of the prospect of this litigation. You explained that it's still pending. And what is the chance of the United States court to find the fundamental rights of the youth or the future generation and recognize the public trust of safe climate system? And this is my first question, and relate to that, some people compare the Juliana v. U.S. case to the famous U.S. Supreme Court case, Massachusetts v. EPA. And some commentators would say the Massachusetts v. EPA was successful because it was more a statutory interpretation case, which the court felt much comfortable with. But the Juliana v. U.S. case is asking for more bold, rather risky, I should say, the approach to ask for the fundamental rights. So I'm wondering what would be your answer to that question. Is it too bold, or we are I think your presentation answered the question most part, but I want you to more emphasize on that issue. And lastly, the United States has no concrete wording in their constitution about the environmental rights, but you argue very convincingly that the combination of public trust doctrine and the substantive due process could constitute the constitutional environmental rights. On the other hand, Korea has in our constitution the environmental right clause, as you recognized, but in reality, in practice, is very rarely recognized by the court. So my last question would be, what do you think are the most or other important preconditions for the court to recognize such environmental rights? Would it be more, do you think the political will is important, or the change of court members would matter, or general public recognition would be more critical, or the more devastating climate crisis would help the court to recognize such rights? Thank you so much. That's my end of discussion.
Well, thank you so much. It's such an honor to be here and to answer those questions. Thank you for the work you've done in creating this conference and creating those questions, very thoughtful questions. So the first question was, what are the chances of the Juliana case of succeeding? And I believe you asked, what is the chance of the right being recognized? And they've already had the right recognized. So that is already a big victory. The district court said the youth have a constitutional right to a stable climate system. That has influenced other courts around the world, actually. And the Ninth Circuit never said otherwise. The two in the majority, they decided against the youth on a different ground. They said, yeah, the youth probably do have those constitutional rights. So that is very strong. And I don't expect the court to move back on that. The issue with Juliana is the case came up as a hypothetical. In our system, and I'm not sure about South Korea's system, but in our system, the courts are supposed to have a trial and then go up on appeal. And there was no trial because the Trump administration lawyers derailed the trial and got an early appeal. So normally there would be a whole factual basis where the trial court would develop a remedy and would try to figure out what is within the court's role and what is not. And there would be a whole record going up. And there wasn't this time. So the two appellate judges said, this isn't the court's role. We leave it to the political branches and that they can vote. The children can vote. Well, the children actually can't vote until they're 18. So I guess my answer to that one is really, they won 90%, but no right is worth anything if it can't be enforced. And it's just a paper right. And so it has to be, the courts have to be able to enforce it. And they have plenty of judicial tradition in this country of doing so. In the desegregation cases, the Brown v. versus Board of Education case that probably people have heard about, the courts played that remedial role very successfully. The second question was comparing the Juliana case to Massachusetts versus EPA. In that case, which went to the Supreme Court, the Supreme Court found that the Environmental Protection Agency had the authority in the Clean Air Act to regulate carbon dioxide. And the Bush II administration, we've had two Bush presidents, so the Bush II administration kept trying to tell the court, we don't have authority to regulate, and even if we did, we have the discretion not to regulate. And the Supreme Court said, no, you have the authority to regulate in the act. Well, that case was very long ago now, and it did nothing really to change the situation. It was a statutory case, and to this day, there's no regulation of carbon dioxide comprehensively under the Clean Air Act in the United States. It has done very little. And President Obama tried to come out with a rule, but it was very little. And President Obama was the person that the youth first sued in Juliana. And so, really, the statutory case would have been good about 40 years ago, because then we had time, and the political branches would have had decades to actually work on the situation. But we are completely out of time, and it will not do, there's not even time, I don't think, for the statutes to work anymore. And President Trump has overhauled every single major regulation that President Obama put into place. So the whole statutory scheme is riddled with dysfunction and this internal rot that comes, truly political rot, that comes from the industry constantly pressing their interests in the administration. So I do think that the fundamental paradigm shift has to happen outside of the statutes. And then the statutes are important tools for the administration to carry out the rights. They have tools to use in the statutes, but the fundamental rights must form the sidebar. And then the last question was about the Korean case and what would it take for the environmental constitutional provision in Korea to really have some weight. Would it take a different composition of the court, or public recognition, or more climate devastation? Well, I caution everybody that we are in a period of time that we won't be in for much longer. We will have more climate chaos, and who knows what will happen. Even if we pull back on fossil fuels, we're going to go through some very rough times. And so I think that the more climate chaos there is, the more the courts recognize what is happening, and that they are the only branch that can pull that car over. It's like a police car pulling the car over before it sends us all over the cliff. I think the public support of these cases is enormously important. I don't really see, all over the world, you see these constitutional provisions, and if a court is not giving effect to it, it just is not living up to its role under a constitutional democracy, because only the courts can enforce constitutional rights. So I do think that the combination of the public outpouring of support and also the climate devastation is slowly getting these courts to wake up. And I have always said, it's not a question of whether a court will rule in the plaintiff's favor. I truly believe the judges will. It's just a question of, will they rule in time?
네, 교수님.
Thank you very much, Professor Woods, for your passionate answers to the question.
한참 논의가 뜨거워지는데.
Now we are having a very heated debate, and I think we all deserve a break so that we can make some changes to the interpretation systems. Thank you once again, Professor Wood, and we'll stay connected.
Okay, thank you.
예, 그러면 20분부터
We are going to resume at 4:20. So in 5 minutes, we are going to resume. So please enjoy your coffee break till 4:20.